Welcome to section 7.4. We're going to solve polynomial equations that are already in factored form. And this is pretty straightforward. First, we're going to learn the zero product property. And it means that if there are two variables next to each other that equal 0, then either the first variable equals 0 and the second variable equals 0. So one of the two has to be 0 in order for it to equal 0. All right, let's do problems and you'll see how easy this is. Now, it's a little confusing sometimes for kids when there's a monomial here, but a monomial, just pretend that there are some parentheses around. And what we're going to do is there's one set of parentheses and here's a second set. We're going to split them into two different equations and we're going to have both of them equal 0. So here's my first one, 2x equals 0. Now we're going to solve it, divide both sides by 2, and then x equals 0. That's our first answer. Our second answer is now the second set of parentheses, which is the binomial. X minus 4 equals 0. We're going to add 4 to both sides, so x is going to equal 4. So now there are actually going to be two answers. And I want to tell you what these two answers are. They're called roots. So in the beginning of the year, we've been working on linear equations, which are straight lines, right? So now we're starting quadratics. And quadratics are going to be, it's a parabola. It's a U-shaped function. And these two solutions here are called the roots, which means that it's going to cross the x-axis at 0 and 4, and it's going to look something like this. This is just a rough sketch. Okay, so now we're going to start drawing the picture of what this equation looks like. I want you to know when there's two x's, when it's x squared, it's going to be a parabola. Okay, these are called quadratics. It's brand new to you guys, but you're going to find them pretty fun and interesting. So now let's move on to the second one. Again, oh great, they're two binomials, so now we're going to split it into two equations. X minus 3 equals 0 and x minus 9 equals 0. We're going to add 3 to both sides, so x is going to be 3. And we're going to add 9 to both sides, so x is going to be 9. Again, what are these answers? Well, it is where this parabola crosses the x-axis, so it's going to cross here at 3, and it's going to cross here at 9, and it's going to make some type of a U-like parabola shape. That's what it means. Really, to make it easier, I want you to take a look at the binomial, and I want you to think, what number do I need to put here for x that's going to make this whole solution inside here 0? Well, it's positive 3, because 3 minus 3 equals 0. Again, what number am I going to put inside this binomial to make it 0? It's going to be positive 9, because 9 minus 9 equals 0. That's how we got our answers. Okay, let's go on. You can do the monitoring progress 1, 2, and 3 on your own, and then check your answers in the book. Now we're going to get to some equations that are a little bit more complicated, but they're already factored for you, which is great. So I have my two binomials here. So I'm going to split them into two equations. 2x plus 7 equals 0 is my first one. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. Shh, my dogs are fighting with each other, sorry. 2x equals negative 7. I'm going to divide both sides by 2, and then x is going to equal negative 7 over 2. So it's a fraction, right? So that means that this parabola, it's going to be at negative 3.5. Okay, so that's the first root, the first intercept. Now let's do the second one. 2x minus 7 equals 0. I'm going to move it over here for some space. I'm going to add 7 to both sides. So 2x is going to equal 7, right? When I add 7 to both sides. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So x is going to equal 7 over 2, which is the same thing as 3.5. So for A, my two roots are going to be negative 3.5 and positive 3.5. Okay, that's where it's going to cross the x-axes. And you can also write them as ordered pairs. So my first ordered pair is going to be negative 3.5 and 0. And then my second ordered pair is going to be 3.5 and 0. Okay, let's go on to B right here. Oh, it's a square. And remember, when it's a square, it means that you're going to see this binomial twice. So I'm going to write it down so you can see what it looks like. It'll make a little more sense to you. So let's split it. X minus 1 equals 0. Add 1 to both sides, so x is going to equal 1. Well, notice that both answers are going to be 1. That means that this equation, this quadratic, only has one root. It's going to look something like this. Like, what does one root mean? It means that it's only crossing the x-axis once, and it's not really crossing, it's touching it. Okay? So it's going to look something like, it's going to be like a U that looks up like that. So it's actually sitting on the x-axis. Okay, now we go on to C. Oh, notice there are 3. That means there's going to actually be 3 answers here. So let's do the first one. X plus 1 equals 0, and you should be able to get used to it and get them and get the answers in your head. So this is going to be negative 1. Okay, what number do I need to put here to make this a 0? The second root is going to be positive 3. What number do I need to put here to make this 0? The third root is going to be a 2. So this is actually a cubic, which means it's going to cross the x-axis 3 times, and it looks like a little squiggly line like that. All right, you won't see too many of those, but just know that if you see 3 x's, there's going to be 3 different roots. Okay, now we're finally getting into factoring. And with factoring, we're going to start off. This is a little bit of tough. It's easier to begin with, and it gets a little bit tougher, but we'll get lots of practice. It's the same thing as multiplying, just backwards. So let's do the greatest common factor here of this binomial. I'm going to rewrite it. 4x to the 4th plus 24x cubed. Okay, you have to think, what do these two things have in common that I can factor out? What is the greatest common factor? Well, I know that I could take a 4 out of both. Well, how many x's? I can also take out 3 x's. So it's the same thing as if you were to divide both of them. So I'm going to divide both of them by 4x cubed, and this one also by 4x cubed, so that you can see it. But when you factor it, you're going to write it as if it were like a multiplication problem. So 4x to the 4th divided by 4x cubed is going to be just x. Plus 24x cubed divided by 4x cubed, right? The x cubes divide out, and that's going to be plus 6. So this is my answer. It's factored. Now, to check your work, what we did in the beginning of the chapter, you can multiply it back in and see if you come out with the same answer. Well, let's check. 4x cubed times x is 4x to the 4th. 4x cubed times 6 is 24x cubed. And that matched with the original equation, so you know that you factored it. So I want you guys to think about factoring as just division. So for example, 3 times 4 equals 12. Okay, that's what we were doing at the beginning of the chapter. Well, now we're doing dividing. So it would be 12, right, divided by, right here we're dividing it out, 3, right, and that's going to be 4. So I want you guys to see each of these problems just like you do with multiplication and division, but factoring is where you're dividing out a common term, and this is going to be factored form. Don't worry, we'll have lots of practice on this. All right, let's try this one. Let's factor the greatest common monomial out of this problem. 8y squared minus 24y. Well, let's think. The common number greatest number that I can divide out here is going to be 8. And then how many variables? 1y. So if I divide 8y squared by 8y. What's left is going to be y. Subtract. Now I'm going to divide 24y by 8y, and the answer is going to be 3. Okay, so we will have lots of practice on this, and you'll get really good at it. Okay, now we're going to solve the problems that equal 0 as equations, but they're not factored yet. So in the beginning of the lesson, they were factored, and these are not factored. So let's try this. Okay, 2x squared plus 8x equals 0. First, we have to factor it because it's not factored. So I'm going to take out 2x, which is the greatest common monomial. What's left is going to be x plus 4. That's equals 0. Oh, now this looks like the problems in the beginning of the lesson. So I'm going to put parentheses around here so you can see it. Now I'm going to split it into two equations. 2x equals 0. Divide both sides by 2. X equals 0. The next equation, x plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4 from both sides. X equals -4. Perfect. So those are my two roots. Let's do b now. 6n squared equals 15n. Oh, it doesn't equal 0. So what we need to do is we need to move this one over. So I'm going to subtract 15n from both sides. I'm going to scoot it over. 6n squared minus 15n. Now it equals 0. So we're going to factor it. What number or what monomial can I divide out of both of these numbers? Well, I can take a 3 out for sure. And how many n's can I take out? I can take out 1n. Okay, so what's left here? This is going to be 6 divided by 3 is 2. N squared divided by n, there's 1n left over. 15n divided by 3n is going to be just 5. Now we have to finish it. I'll put parentheses around here. Hopefully you can get used to this now. 3n equals 0. So the first root is going to be 0. The second root is going to be a little bit harder because it's going to be a fraction. We're going to add 5 to both sides. So 2n equals 5. Divide both sides by 2. So n equals 5 over 2, which is the same thing as 2.5. Okay, there's a lot of information. Let me know if you have any questions and enjoy the work.